Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Be Bold America. I'm your host, Jill Cody. Our program today is The Making of Donald Trump with David Cay Johnston. Pulitzer Prize winning investigative journalist David Cay Johnston stated in his best-selling book, The Making of Donald Trump, that when Donald Trump rode down the Trump Tower lobby escalator live on national television in June 2015 to announce his campaign for president, nearly every journalist treated his candidacy as a vanity project. Having covered Donald Trump intensely from 1988 through 1995 and following him ever since, David knew his dramatic entry on live national television indicated Donald Trump was serious. He also knew that this presidential run would not be for the benefit of the United States of America, but only for Donald Trump. As the Financial Times wrote of Johnston's book, it gives Trump the thorough scrubbing he deserves. He makes a compelling case that Trump has the attributes of both dictator and deceiver. We have big things to do. Our interview guest is that very Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist, David Cay Johnston. David is one of America's most award-winning investigative journalists with a long career reporting for the Los Angeles Times, the Philadelphia Inquirer, and the New York Times, where his work was awarded the Pulitzer Prize. He is a journalist with a specialty in economics and tax issues and is the author of several best-selling books. Currently, David teaches criminal justice, law, journalism, and political science at Rochester Institute of Technology. He's also co-founder of DC Report, which is a unique not-for-profit service that provides reporting, information, and perspective on the policies, politics, and events that affect our everyday lives and futures. Of local note, David graduated from Soquel High School and considers Santa Cruz County the best place in the world to live. Hello, David Cay Johnston. It is an honor to have you on the show. Welcome to Be Bold America.
Well, glad to be with you, Jill. And since you went through that detailed outline, let me just point out that I started out as a reporter for the old county news in Aptos and the Valley Press in the San Lorenzo Valley. And when I was 19 years old, I became a staff writer at the San Jose Mercury, where I made the front page. In fact, the top of the front page in less than 2 months.
Oh my! The top of the page—that's an honor for a 19-year-old.
Yeah.
Wow, you know this area very well. Do you come visit at all?
Oh, sure.
Oh, you do.
Sure.
Oh, good.
My high school class has regular meetings. I usually come to Santa Cruz about once every 2 years.
Oh, that's nice to know. Well, maybe you'll let me know next time and I'll buy you a cup of coffee.
Okay.
Oh, I'm so delighted that you're on the program. You know, I know your book, The Making of Donald Trump, has been out for a while, but I still learned a lot. I read it from cover to cover, made check marks, notes, comments on the side columns, and I still learned a lot from it. So I have more questions prepared than probably the time we have. So I thought I'd start by asking you where you would like to begin. What do you want to make sure we talk about first?
Well, I think people need to understand two things about Donald. The first is that he is a career white-collar criminal. That's the very subject I'll be teaching in the fall at RIT. He's the third-generation head of a four-generation white-collar crime family. The white-collar crime costs America about 20 times as much as traditional street crime, burglaries, murder, arson. But we pay very little attention to it, which is why white-collar criminals are rarely indicted, especially rarely indicted in comparison to the damage that they do. And the other is that what you're seeing today with Donald saying crazy things, putting out things like posing as Jesus and then trying to say, oh, no, I was being a doctor and other ridiculous stuff. Donald lives in a fantasy world in his own head. And if he says it or thinks it, that makes it true. And in that sense, he's like a novelist, because if he suddenly realizes he's written himself into a corner, he just changes what he wrote. Now, I first met Donald in 1988 and wrote about him becoming president someday, which, frankly, people thought I was nuts. I wrote about it again in 92, and in 2011 and 12, he announced he was running for president, and every politics reporter in the country treated him as a serious candidate except two people, Lawrence O'Donnell of MSNBC and me.
And you, right.
And both of us, Lawrence and I grew up very, very differently, but we very often come to similar conclusions because I think we see the world in very, very similar ways. And not being trained as a journalist, so I don't have the blinders on that a lot of people get if they go to journalism school, I recognized that Donald was not really running for president in 2012. He was using it as a forum to make these crazy accusations that Barack Obama wasn't born in Hawaii, although he could never explain, well, how did it end up in the competing newspapers in Honolulu, the Advertiser and the Star Bulletin, the routine announcement of birth, that his name is there. And more importantly, he was running for a better contract for his TV show with NBC. And lo and behold, one day Donald says, well, I should be president. I'm the only person who should be president. I mean, none of these idiots are qualified to be president, but right now my TV show needs me more. And the politics reporters all had egg on their face. So when he announced again in 2015, I dropped everything I was doing. I spent the next 7 years 24/7 reporting on Donald. So I created DC Report to talk about what he was doing as opposed to what he was saying, because I realized he had an opportunity to get to the White House, and I knew that because I had written a best-selling trilogy of books about how the American economy is systematically stripping people of their money and redistributing it upwards through all sorts of tax, subsidy, and anti-competition devices that essentially hardly anybody knew about before I wrote Perfectly Legal, Free Lunch, and the Fine Print. So, understand Donald is A, a career criminal, and B, he's nuts.
Well, you started right where I was going to start, too, is that he came from a long line of cheats. He's been taught this.
Oh, yeah.
He's been taught this, and he's just created an orgy of corruption and self-dealing beyond our imagination in the White House.
Right. Well, yes, and this is no surprise to me or those people who closely followed my work. Donald's grandfather, when he turned 16, fled Bismarck's draft in Germany. A lot of young men did that because if you were drafted back then, you might not get out until you're an old man or you're dead. So he came to the U.S. He made a fortune. He was essentially a pimp. He went back to Germany, married a woman, not the one his mother had picked out for him, came back to America. Then the wife couldn't stand New York City, where they lived a very wealthy life, even though the only obvious business was a little tobacco stand, with a wooden Indian out front, and went back to Germany and said, here, I'm going to deposit all this money in the local economy. And the German government wrote him a letter, a copy of which I have. It basically said, hey, you're a draft dodger. Get the hell out of our country. And so he came back to New York. And he died in the pandemic in 1918, often misnamed the Spanish flu. And young Fred, even though he was only 13 years old, started a business with his mother, building garages in the outer boroughs of Manhattan for these new automobiles. I mean, this is 1918. Automobiles were quite new. And he was very industrious and very hardworking. And he also was doing everything he could to cheat people. And in fact, he was called to testify before the Senate Currency Committee in the 50s, accused of ripping taxpayers off for, in today's money, more than $40 million when he built subsidized housing for GIs and sailors who came back from World War II. And he becomes late. He's late to the hearing. And he says, gentlemen, this is all wrong. I didn't take this money from the government. Yes, there's more money there than the contract said, but I didn't take it. It's in the company bank account. Where else would you keep millions of dollars? And Fred basically invented the modern supermarket when he was in his late 20s. Sold it for in the beginnings of the Depression for $1 million. The idea, and went on to make a lot of money in real estate. And taught his sons to lie, cheat, and steal. You could do anything you needed to get money as long as you didn't get arrested. One day when a neighbor boy, Johnny Messer, 7 years old, was riding his bicycle past the Trump home, which wasn't a big, fabulous mansion or something. It's the kind of home you might expect a successful surgeon to live in. Nice big house, but not a mansion. And Johnny drops, just as Fred Trump is coming home in his Cadillac Brougham, which was, back in that time, was the biggest Cadillac they made. It was made to say, look how big and successful I am. And by the time Johnny stops his bike and as a little boy manages to get off it and turn the bike around to go back to get his quarter that he had dropped onto the sidewalk in front of the Trump home, Fred Trump had pulled into his driveway, run to the sidewalk, picked up the quarter, and when Johnny pulled up, he put the quarter in his face, holding it, with his thumb to his fist, and goes, "It's mine now."
Oh, wow.
Who does that to a 7-year-old boy? The kind of father who produced Donald Trump.
Yes. I may have read it in Dr. Thomas Frank's book, Trump on the Couch. Dr. Thomas Franks is a professor of psychiatry at Georgetown University, and he called Donald Trump's personality type as a destroyer. But he also, I think it may have been in his book that I read, that his father taught Donald that there aren't winners and losers. There are only losers and killers.
I've read that, and it's a pretty reasonable interpretation of what went on. Donald was the second son, and everything was intended to go to the first son.
To Fred.
The first son, Fred Jr., he was a pretty gentle soul, and he couldn't take Dad. He ultimately became a TWA airline we no longer have, TWA pilot, and was a complete disappointment to his father. And Donald saw opportunity, and he stepped forward and proceeded to do anything Daddy wanted, to the point of Donald assaulting Mayor Abe Beame. Donald is about, when he was young, 6'2", and Abe Beame was 5 feet if he stood straight. Because he thought he was getting what his father wanted. I mean, it was just completely out of control to the point where Dad eventually had to send him to a military academy that had a reputation for sexually humiliating new cadets.
Oh, boy. So
we don't know what happened there. But given that Donald talks about and treats women roughly the way a junior high school boy would, I think his maturity and development basically was just stopped at that point.
Well, how on earth, David, has he gotten away with so much over these decades? New York never seemed to... I blame New York because there's so much he did there that he should already been in jail before he had a chance to run for presidency.
You want to blame New Jersey much more than New York.
Okay, I'll blame New Jersey then.
So I was an LA Times investigative reporter, first in San Francisco, and then I moved down to LA. And because of my investigations of the LAPD and Lockheed and a bunch of the things Lockheed was involved in, a bunch of other stuff, the paper was unhappy with my work because they weren't known for investigative work. They were known for the most thoroughly reported and even literary articles. In fact, I once posted in the newsroom America's greatest literary daily posing as a newspaper. And so I went to Atlantic City because in 1988, realized that we were going to have casino gambling spread all across America because of a Supreme Court decision. And Donald should never have been licensed. Many years later, the Australian government refused to give him a casino license because of all of his corrupt ties to mobsters. The government in England wouldn't even consider him. The government in Nevada, of all places, would not give him a license. And Donald's, there are people who will say, well, he's in the construction business in New York. Of course he has to deal with mobsters. He does. There's no question about that. But Donald gratuitously dealt with lots of other mobsters who had nothing to do with it. And when several of the wealthy developers in New York, and Donald always claims I was one of the 5 biggest developers. He wasn't in the top 10. But a group of them went to the federal government in the 1970s and said, hey, look, these mob guys, the mafia, they are out of control. They are so deeply in our pockets, we're not going to be able to build anything in New York. The city is going to die unless you go after these people. Donald instead ran not to the FBI, but to the mob. So when there was a concrete strike in 1983, and Trump Tower was being built, and Trump Tower is 58-story cement building. It's not a traditional steel girder high-rise. It's a concrete box. The delivery of concrete stopped everywhere in New York City. If you were supposed to have a new driveway poured, during that time period, concrete never showed up. There was one location that continued to get its concrete, and that was Trump Tower. And who owned the concrete company? It was owned by 2 of the leading mobsters, the either head or deputy head. There's some controversy of it, of one family, and the head of the other. This is the Genoveses and the Gambinos. And that just screamed about Donald's involvement. Well, when he was owner of a casino, he was involved with all sorts of people casino owners aren't supposed to be around. Nothing happened. He allowed children as young as 12, and a number of them 13 and 14, to gamble in his casino.
Oh, dear.
He gave them liquor and limousines and hotel suites. These were kids obviously had money to spend. In one case, an Atlantic City detective went to, not Donald, but another casino and said, hey, you got to stop letting my daughter gamble, and they just laughed at him. And this is all while the state of New Jersey is saying that the Atlantic City casino industry is the most highly regulated industry in the history of the world, more highly regulated than nuclear power plants. And I arrived in town and demolished that, showed it was all nonsense when I was at the Philadelphia Inquirer, and I wrote a book called Temples of Chance, which is about 40% about Donald. Donald actually is the only known case of a casino in Atlantic City cheating customers. You make much more money in the casino business if you're honest, because people come. But Donald literally was cheating novice roulette players.
Oh my!
And nothing hit him in any way. I mean, I asked him one day. I've spent hundreds of hours with Donald. I asked him one day about the 12-year-old girl gambling in his casino. And you'd think he'd say, "Yeah, my staff screwed up," or that was a terrible mistake," or "I'm sorry that happened." He just looked at me and said, "Yeah, I paid a fine."
Oh, my. Well, you know what, David? We need to break for a pledge drive, and you're going to be my pitch partner.
I'm happy to do that.
I know you are. Just start by telling us what you've done for public radio already in your career.
I've been doing radio since KSCO when I was 15 years old, and TV since 1973. We need to have public radio. We need to have a radio that is not connected to the commercial demands of a society where there are fewer and fewer corporations exerting more and more control and reducing competition for their benefit. We need to have independent voices so that we have more than one perspective on what's happening. And the way you do that is primarily by supporting public broadcasting. So when Donald Trump illegally cut off all the money to NPR...
Broke my heart.
And to PBS.
And Radio America.
Wife, who for 30 years was the CEO of the Community Foundation here in Rochester, New York. That's why we live here.
Mm-hmm.
We pledged to cover 1/1000th of our local station's shortfall, and then we reached out to all sorts of people in town who have the resources to do it, and we ended up raising, I think it was $20,200, if I remember my math correctly. Now, nowhere near the $1.2 million that they were short. But if you don't support public radio, you're going to have fewer choices. You're going to have less news. You're not going to hear Tom Hartman with his very trenchant observations.
Or Be Bold America with you.
Or Be Bold, with Be Bold America with Jill Cody.
Oh, thank you.
So and little amounts of money do a lot in radio. The entire budget of NPR's Morning Edition and All Things Considered. Remember, they have some correspondents overseas, not a lot, but a few that live overseas, which is an incredibly expensive thing to do. The entire budget of both All Things Considered and Morning Edition on NPR is smaller than what was being paid to Katie Couric when she was the anchor of the CBS Evening News.
And David, I'd like to introduce you to Howard Feldstein, our program director. Howard, meet David.
I've been enjoying the program so far, and I really appreciate, the whole interview and your observations on Donald Trump, but and then especially what you just said about the importance of community radio. And I hope our listeners take to heart your perspective there and your advice to support this particular radio station. The phone numbers, let me give the numbers. I'll jump up and answer the call at 831-900-5773. That's 831-900-5773. Or make a contribution online at ksqd.org. We're a nonprofit. We're non-commercial. We're not beholden to anyone except our listeners and our community. And wherever you're listening, you're part of that community, and we need you to be part of our sustainers. We want to thank Daniel H., one of our recent contributors, and the other 200 people who have contributed this week. But we need everyone to stand up, tell a neighbor to listen, and tell a neighbor to contribute, and then contribute yourself at 831-900-5773.
Well, I let the cat out of the bag a few minutes before the show and told Howard this, but Howard, I plan to donate $1,000.
That's incredible. That's wonderful. And
you can use it by...
Let me give you some good news about that.
Okay.
A provision Congress put in the tax code, and my next book will propose an entirely new federal tax code that's simple, cheat-proof, and fairly distributes the burdens, has for 1 year, this year, a provision that if you don't itemize on your tax return, and 95% of people don't, you can take a deduction for up to $2,000 for a gift to a charity like your station. Normally, you wouldn't get any tax benefit for that because 95% of us don't itemize anymore. But this is a one-time deal. Maybe Congress will make it permanent. So that's one way to give, and you can actually get a deduction, and it'll reduce your tax burden. The second, if you're 70 and a half or older, you can make a gift from your retirement funds if you have enough money to do that, called a qualified charitable distribution. And then thirdly, if you have something called a donor-advised fund, it's like a mini version of a foundation, but it's also like a fund, an investment fund at Vanguard or Fidelity or somewhere like that. You can also make a gift from there, and it will count as part of your required minimum distribution, but it will not be counted as income to you. Mm-hmm. So there are multiple ways to give where there's still, despite all the efforts by the Republicans in Congress to get rid of charitable benefits, except for very rich people, there's still opportunities to do that.
Right. But even now, if anyone does itemize, they can deduct, because we are a 501c3 nonprofit. Most important thing is to contribute one way or another. Perhaps you have an employer who matches contributions. That's another way that would benefit us.
Yes.
But again, right now, just whether or not there are any additional perks to it, the contribution itself is essential because it comes right back to you in the form of quality programming and unfettered programming. And builds community and supports community. And perhaps you're doing it for someone else who is not able to afford anything right now. If you're in the position to have a little bit of $10 a month, $20, that's 33 cents a day is $10 a month. And that $10 a month entry on your credit card statement will be probably the smallest thing and the easiest thing to swallow. 831-900-5773. stand up for Jill here with her challenge of $1,000. If you can contribute $1,000, great. But maybe 10 of you can contribute 100 to meet that challenge, or 20 of you can contribute 50. We know we have the listeners there, and just need your call now.
And just to share one reason why I support community and public radio so much is that back during when Rick Snyder was governor of, was it Minnesota, David? I think it was Minnesota. Wisconsin?
Rick Snyder? No, I'm sorry, Michigan. He was governor of Michigan.
Michigan. He was Michigan, and he had the executive managers and dissolved the city councils, the elected Democratic city councils. Yeah. One of the first things that the executive manager did to the city of Benton Harbor, I think, was dissolve the community radio station. The very first thing he did was get rid of it, because that's how people communicated. Mm-hmm. And it's a very democratic organization. And he didn't want people talking to each other, so that was the first thing that they got rid of.
Well, dictators left and right do it. The first things that take control, the airports and the airwaves.
And the airwaves.
Yes.
Isn't it our overseas Air America, or no, that's old station.
Voice of America.
Voice of America.
Various subsidiaries that were in different languages around the world were also illegally shut down.
Yes.
Judges ordered that restored.
Yes. Yeah, but a lot of people are gone from it. Anyway, we should get back to our show.
So let's give the phone numbers and the website, ksqd.org. You can do it while you listen. You can take as little or as short amount of time as you want at ksqd.org and choose a thank you gift if you'd like. Or give me a call, 831-900-5773. Back to the show. Thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you, Howard. Okay, David, back to our topic here. It seems like Trump has just used lawsuits constantly. He won't follow the law, but it seems like he's used lawsuits like a cleaver to slice people into shreds. I was disturbed when reading your book how many times his illegal activities were identified, but then no charges would be filed. I mean, I read that over and over and over again. No charges were filed.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, there's a deeper problem, which I'll be exploring in this class I'm going to teach in the fall on crime in the suites, white-collar crime in the 21st century. Mm-hmm. White-collar crime is very lucrative, and it can be stopped, but a couple of things have to happen. One of them is the law as written by Congress and interpreted by the courts is just full of loopholes. It's just all sorts of ways to get out of things. And in one of my earlier books, I wrote about the global crossing scam. And everybody involved at the top of that should have gone to prison, but they kept it going for 42 months. And then they said, the reason the business collapsed was because of market conditions, and we couldn't have done anything about it. And frankly, if I were on a jury, I probably would have had to say, okay, reasonable doubt. I think you're all scummy, but, yeah, you did keep it going for 42 months. Donald is a terrible student. He tells everybody, I was an honor student at the finest business school in America. Well, he didn't go to the finest business school in America. He went to, which is the Wharton Graduate School of Finance in Philadelphia. He went to the undergraduate program, which had one professor who taught one subject, real estate. He was almost never seen on campus. He was described by lots of young women I've interviewed from back then and in Manhattan with the same word again and again and again when I'd ask him about, was he asked out? And after all, he's a pretty good-looking guy back then, blonde hair, tall, rich, clearly going to be richer. And the consistent word to describe him was creep. And he learned from Roy Cohn, the notorious lawyer for
Talk about
Senator
a creep.
Joe McCarthy.
Oh.
Yeah, yes. That the way you defeat law enforcement, the way you defeat anybody who wants to sue you, is you go on the attack. You never concede a comma. You are pure as the driven snow. It's the FBI or the New York police or the person who I'm suing. They are evil. They must be defeated. And bullying people. Donald has threatened to sue me innumerable times, only once in person, which is sort of indicative of his character.
Right.
All the other times on the phone. One point he said, the sheriff's going to put you and your 8 children out on the curb. He never did sue me. He never would. because he knows that everything I write and say about him, I can back up and prove to be the case. But, he's sued people. He's been involved in, before he became president, more than 4,000 lawsuits. Now, some of them were to collect debts owed the casino, but there were lots of others for lots of reasons that principally were to intimidate people, bully people, and run through their resources, which is one of the big problems in American law, that if you're rich, you can defeat someone with a nothing case just because you have resources and they don't.
Mm-hmm. Dan Rather calls him the con man in chief. And you also wrote in the book about...
Yeah, he just to be clear, he got that from me.
Oh, did he? Okay. All right, that's good to know.
I've been saying Donald Jill is the greatest con artist in the history of the world. There are more than 24 con artists who ended up in prison because of my reporting since 1966, mostly in the 70s and 80s. And Donald is in a class by himself as a con artist. I admire him as a con artist. Mm-hmm. In the same way that I admired a mob hitman named Harry Kaladuris, whom I spent dozens of hours with, for being very good at what he does. And so did a lot of cops, by the way, admire Harry. But Donald is a remarkable con. I mean, he's got people persuaded that he is a business genius. He's not. None of his businesses made money. He borrowed all the money for every business he started except one. And once he had sucked all the life out of them, he dumped the carcass with unpaid bills. He claims to know more about nuclear weapons than anybody else. He doesn't know jack. He claims to be the world's greatest expert on 22 subjects, and one of them, taxes, I have a global reputation about.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Well, Donald was asked once under oath. So, Mr. Trump, what do you know about accounting? I don't know anything about accounting. You don't know anything about accounting? I don't know anything. I live at the bean counters. And the lawyers questioning him under oath went on for page after page after page, tying him down 6 ways to Sunday. So he could never escape this. He couldn't say, I didn't understand the question. Why would that matter? Why should the audience care? You cannot understand taxes if you don't know accounting. I had to learn enough accounting that for 8 years I had a joint appointment from Syracuse Law. I'm not a lawyer, but I was a professor of law there, with the Graduate Business School. And the Syracuse Graduate Business School is really a graduate accounting school. You have to know accounting to know tax. And yet he says all the time, I know more than anyone in history about taxes. And people believe this.
I know. I don't get it. I also read in the book, you wrote that he said, why do I have to repent or seek God's forgiveness if I'm not making mistakes?
Yes, I've never done anything in my life that requires asking forgiveness, he told a radio talk show host. And, what more do you need to know? I mean, if you believe in the New Testament, if you're a religious person, and to be clear, I'm not, then you are supposed to be in a constant state of forgiveness because we do things constantly that, they're not exactly the right and gracious and charitable thing to do. But everything Donald does is self-justified because in his mind, he's special. He literally believes and has said for years, that he should run the entire world. No one else can do it. He alone can do it. That fits with his saying to people about their economic woes, I alone can
fix it.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, I alone can fix it. But he's also said save you. Donald ran for president in 2016 on material from my trilogy on the American economy that I mentioned earlier, Perfectly Legal, Free Lunch, and the Fine Print. His tax plan that he announced, which had nothing to do with what he ultimately did, comes right out of my book. And by the way, Al Gore, I'm sorry, not Al Gore, John Kerry, Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, and all of those people ran for president taking things from my book on the American economy and how it really works as opposed to what we're told is the textbook version of it. All those people running for president relied on my work, including Donald. But Donald, of course, had no intention of doing what he said. He just did that, and then people remember that he said, oh, you won't have to pay any taxes say you make $50,000 a year as a married couple. It's about 30 today, and this is 11 years later. He goes around now saying, well, under my tax bill, there's no tax on tips. No, there's a narrow group of people who will not have to pay it. There's no more tax on Social Security. Hey, guess what? I pay taxes on 85% of my Social Security. Mm-hmm. There's a narrow group of people who will no longer pay. But he talks about these as universals, and there are lots of people who believe that, and I've actually interviewed people who went, oh, yeah, I don't pay taxes on Social Security anymore. And I said, why don't you check and ask the person who does your taxes? And they come back and say, well, I am paying taxes. They must have made a mistake. And I go, no, it wasn't a mistake. The law applied to a narrow group of people, and you didn't qualify. Well, he wouldn't do that. Yeah, right. Donald is such a man of great depth and integrity. I mean, he wouldn't do that. I mean, why would anyone think that he would do that, especially if you don't know that he had 12-year-olds gambling in his casinos?
Well, one thing that I wanted to bring up with you is that, in my view, Donald Trump is a dark triad personality, and the triad being narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. So, we know the narcissism, people call him a malignant narcissist all the time, enormous egos with fragile self-esteem and the honors. I mean, the FIFA Peace Prize and the gold bar from Tim Cook, which just horrified me. And then, of course, so that's really obvious. And the psychopathy, obviously there's no emotions there. There's no humility, compassion, or empathy. But he knows how to mimic them or say the right things sometimes. And, he told his brother, Fred, which you mentioned earlier, because Fred had the older brother, Fred had a son that was very ill, and Trump basically once said, why don't you let him die? I mean, that kind of thing. But the Machiavellianism, I think this is what we're really, as a country, and your statement about why he thinks he can run the world, that's where I see the thugs on the street, because Machiavellianism, unscrupulous and resort to deceit and cunning and political assassination and using fear, and they'll do and say anything to stay in power. Hence, the coup attempt on January 6th. Go ahead.
That's exactly right. And Jill, Donald has said, and he only did this in 2025 to the Atlantic magazine. I think it was the Atlantic magazine, but he said to some journalists, so we have a tape recording of it, he was asked about mistakes, and he said, well, I made one mistake in my life. Oh, what was that? I never should have left the White House.
I remember that, yes.
I told people in 2011, I was on MSNBC, I wrote some columns, that if Donald Trump got to the White House, he would never leave peacefully. Mm-hmm. And literally, I had a couple of prominent national politics reporters, and I'm not a politics reporter. I hate that I've been drawn into this because of my knowledge of Donald. And I'm interested in policy, not politics. That's ridiculous. Of course he'd leave the White House. And I would say to him, you don't know Donald like I do. And Bandy Lee...
yes, well, Bandy, I've had on the show. Yes.
Well, Bandy, I knew Bandy before all this blew up. She was fired from her position as a tenured psychiatry professor at Yale Medical School because of what she said from her research. Bandy studies how leaders of cults and organizations transfer their mental illness to their followers. It's not physically the same, but the concept is the same as spreading germs and disease. They get people to adopt their mental illness and embrace it. And for 7 years, when I was publisher of DC Report, I was the only place she could get published in America. We ran 40 articles either by her or about her. Nobody would touch her because Yale had fired her.
Yes.
And yet we now know she was spot on correct. And
Absolutely.
Layered on Donald's narcissism, I used to say before he became president, Donald has delusions of grandeur. Once he became president, it's kind of hard to make the case. But you know what? I'm back to saying that because now that he's done these repeated symbols of him as God, and he's put up these other things, I'm back to saying Donald has delusions of grandeur. And look what he's proposing now. He wants take the biggest, by far, military budget in the world, over $1 trillion, and increase it to almost $1.5 trillion. Well, the only reason you would do that is endless wars, which he specifically promised. If you elect the other person in all three campaigns, if you elect the other person, they're going to start a war with Iraq. The only way they can stay in office is starting a war in Iraq. The only way they can get elected is starting a war in Iraq. I will be the president of peace. There will be no more of these wars. He is getting ready to turn us into this military force that's just going to go conquer land and take it. And Donald believes in this. He says, we're just going to take Iran's oil. During the Iraq invasion, we should just take their oil. Why? Well, because everything belongs to Donald. The only issue is, Jill, he hasn't taken your house yet. But it's his house. You're just in his house.
Well, one of the things he said that really put a shiver down my spine was my own morality, my own mind is the only thing that can stop me.
Right.
That's a Machiavellian statement, if I ever heard one.
Yes, and Donald, when I used to be on right-wing radio, they don't have anybody like me on anymore. I would have people call in and they would go, "You're just jealous because he has this beautiful wife and a lot of money and you don't." And I would say, I have a wonderful wife, a wonderful family of 8 children, all grown. My grandchildren are grown at this point. And I have more than enough money. And I do not wish or am not jealous of Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a miserable human being. He has never known one day of contentment, of joy, of love. He is this empty vessel, and he tries to fill this emptiness inside with claims that he's worth far more than he actually is, with the claims he's the greatest lover in the history of the world. Read Stormy Daniels on his 47-second.
Or listen to John Barron.
Yeah, and
his name.
There was an alter ego that Donald used to trick reporters into who didn't know his voice. He can't do that anymore, but people didn't know his voice back then. And he's this empty vessel inside, and I feel sorry for him. He is the nightmare version of Groundhog Day, but instead of being a grown man who lives the same day for 10,000 times, that's what Ivan Reitman said before he died, he's reliving his a day in junior high school 10,000 times. And I don't know you, but I have no desire to go back through my...
Oh, neither do I. And I don't feel sorry for him at all because he's killed so many people from the pandemic, his mishandling of all of that, and what he's done with the Iraq War. And I think we need to have one more pitch time here for our pledge drive. This is KSQD, and I want to say that it's time for another pledge drive pitch, just to entice all of you to maybe match my $1,000 contribution, or at least get started to do that. Howard?
$1,000 is a lot of money, and I really appreciate it, Jill. I can't thank you enough. And we have such a small budget here. It's just kind of boggles my mind when I hear about the other numbers being thrown around, the millions and billions that Trump has corruptly, pocketed and given to friends, and just the waste and the fraud and the corruption that's out there. We are so lean and mean here at KSQD. We are really living on a shoestring, but living within our means. We have an annual budget of less than $250,000. I think it's $20,000 a month or so, and that's just for 3 half-time staff. I'm one of them, and I work more than half-time, and I'm not getting wealthy. Nobody's getting wealthy here. And we have overhead, of course. We have licensing fees and program fees and tower rent, that sort of thing. Everything's transparent, accountable. We have an all-volunteer, hardworking board of directors, all-volunteer staff like you, Jill, on the air. All of our program hosts are volunteer. And it's all because of the love and the passion we have, the commitment we have to building community and serving the community. So the flip side of that is the responsibility of the community, of listeners, to support it to whatever extent each individual can. And the beauty of community radio is that it is indeed a community effort, and that no one person is giving us that $240,000 a year.
And the phone number to call?
831-900-5773. Do your part. Again, we thank the 201 people who have contributed so far this week, 202 now, counting you, Jill, including, I think it was Daniel H., the most recent. But please step forward at 831-900-5773 and show how you understand the value of your contribution to building community and sustaining community.
And our topic today is The Making of Donald Trump with David Cay Johnston. And we're speaking with that Pulitzer Prize winning investigative journalist, David Cay Johnston. And David, I don't know. You have followed Donald Trump for decades. I can't tolerate the man for more than a few minutes. How have you kept your sanity all these years? You sound sane.
Well, yeah, I've also had people say, why are you so focused on him? Why are you so emotionally connected with him? It's my job. Mm-hmm. After I had solved at the LA Times an especially vicious, repugnant murder, and the police had framed a young man who didn't commit the murder, and I went out and hunted down the real killer and confronted him.
Oh, wow.
Jigsaw John, the most famous homicide detective in the history of the LAPD, invited me to his birthday party bash where homicide detectives from 11 states came. And in front of all these cops, and Daryl Gates, the police chief, wanted to be fired yesterday. He hated me. He was always denouncing me for my work. Jigsaw put his arm around me and talked positively about my work, which stunned a lot of people in the room. And then he said something very important, referring to the case that I had been writing about in the paper. I'd hunted down the real killer. He said, when I get a case, I don't care who the killer is. All I care about is that I get the killer. And in the case of Donald, it's, he's an important force. I knew back in 1988 he was going to be an important cultural force in America. And it was even possible he would con his way into the White House. And I know him, many of the people have said this, not me. That I know Donald's mind better than anybody else in journalism. And it's my duty in the same way that, I've exposed all of these sham tax shelters and ways of stealing people's pension money and other crimes. It's my job. It's not personal, I don't go on thinking about Donald on an unemotional level. I think about him on a professional level. And it's hard. I gave up being publisher of DC Report because there came a point when I just couldn't be my entire life except for my teaching at the law school.
Mm-hmm. So you did some self-care there, and there's just switching the subject a little bit, but not totally. Something I read in your book, which is, it is a doozy, and I just wanted to hear more about it, which was that Trump's Bedminster golf course is zoned for a future cemetery, and that's how he doesn't pay property taxes, and I guess he buried his first wife there, right? How does he find all these angles? Tell us more about this cemetery.
Well, Trump is I'll give him credit for this. Trump actually is very good at finding tax dodges, but it's because professionals, want to get fees from him, and they tell him about these things. So his golf course in New Jersey, first of all, he runs goats on a small portion of it, and therefore the whole place is a farm, and of course farms pay very, very reduced property tax rates. Then he set off this piece of land as a cemetery. Ivanka is buried there. The Daily Mail, the London tabloid, got a picture of her grave after she'd been there in the ground for about a year, and it was all overgrown. Mm-hmm. Nobody was taking care of it. I don't know why anybody would be surprised, given who Donald is. Mm-hmm. But, he absolutely has professional advisors who tell him about things like that. He doesn't know what they are. He doesn't know how they work. He also fabricates. I wrote a piece for the New York Daily News showing that when we got Donald Trump's tax returns, thanks to Congressman Richard Neal of Massachusetts, who fought a tough struggle to get his tax returns, which by law were supposed to be just turned over to the Ways and Means Committee that Neal heads, they showed that Donald had created more than 60 fictitious, or it's not possible the accounting is honest businesses. He had ones that their income and their outgo was to the penny identical, and that doesn't ever happen in the real world. Donald was tried twice for tax fraud in the 1980s, which I'm virtually the only person who's reported it. There's public record of it, the decisions of the judges. where he fabricated a non-existent business, had no receipts, no invoices, no calendar entries, nothing, but he took over $600,000 in expenses without a single justification. And he was told by the judges in both cases that he should never do this again. These were civil, not criminal. He could have been prosecuted criminally, but he was prosecuted civilly. Well, when he obviously continued doing it, because when he got 6 years of his returns from decades later, he every year had phony businesses that don't exist, that he just made up. And I wrote a piece telling Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan DA, prosecute him on these tax crimes. If ever there's a slam dunk conviction, here it is, because these judges put him on notice. You can't create a phony business. That proves what the law calls mens rea, or criminal intent. And yet, nothing's ever happened to him. I did talk to an IRS person once who called me and said he had been assigned when he was, wet behind the ears, newcomer, to Donald Trump's tax return. And he answered enough questions that inside things that I know about the IRS.
And David, I have about 30 seconds. Go ahead.
Okay. Anyway, Donald basically bullied his way, saying it'll be the end of your career and your boss's career if you continue to pursue me. That's how Donald treats people, with bully threats, and you got to stand up to him.
I think that's how he manages the Republicans in Congress. I know where your wife works. I know where your children go to school. I mean, anyway, so just in 1 minute, maybe quickly, keep, stop, starts for people that are listening. Regarding all of this, what should we keep doing, stop doing, and start doing? Any thoughts at all?
Do never voluntarily comply. Secondly, get out the vote. And in California, it's not going to matter much. It's certainly not going to matter in Santa Cruz. We know who's going to be elected.
But this becomes a podcast and it's heard all over the country and the world. So that's a good message.
If you have the resources to go in person, go help with a campaign in Nevada or Arizona or Oregon or Washington. Go and drive people to the polls if need be, because we have the power if we exercise it. If we don't, then our democracy's toast.
That's it. We must take action, and our future depends on it. David, thank you for being our bold guest today and my pledge drive pitch partner extraordinaire. It's been a real honor to speak with you. I was so excited to have you on the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill.
You are listening to KSQD Santa Cruz and KSQT Prunedale. Many voices, one station. Listen worldwide online at ksqd.org. My name is Jill Cody, and I want to thank you for listening to Be Bold America. Until next time, keep, stop, start.